Okay, the recording is going. Um,
And Vishnu might join us, right? So
highly unlikely.
okay, okay.
The intention's there, but I know Vishnu. I would be surprised if he popped up. So how should we proceed today? What do you all think?
Well, I'm inspired by John Roberts' background to say that we need to start the book of the Traveler of the Worlds.
Good. Then does everyone good with that?
No,
Yeah.
I think we should continue where we are. We are going, otherwise we get confused with our sequence. We are at the book 2, right? The World Stare.
Yes.
Yeah, so the if Marco was going to join us, there was talk about rereading the previous canto.
Like,
Oh, here he is.
And
Here he
here's
is.
Marco. Yay.
Hey,
Hi.
hi there.
Marco, welcome back.
Thank you. I thought I would join today, even though I'm not yet come back home. But I've been trying to catch up with the reading and didn't want to lose too many of these sessions. I love your background, John Robert. I would just see we have some workers here at the house, and there's going to be a pickup of a large dumpster that's outside. So I'm wondering if it's okay with you if I'm present but listening, because I don't want to get interrupted while we're reading. But I'd like to be present to connect back in. Would that be okay with you all?
Oh,
You
glad
bet.
to have you.
You bet.
Where are you in your reading, Marco? What's the last that you've read or listened to us reading on the recordings?
The Canto V of Book 1.
Oh, have you cycled through that?
But I didn't listen to the recording from last time.
Yeah.
I listened to the one from before.
Okay.
Which was, I believe, the full read through of Canto IV.
Okay. Good. Because we had talked last week of either going back over Book 1, Canto V, or going into the Book of the Traveler of the Worlds. If you weren't present, we were probably going to just move on to the Book of the Traveler of the Worlds, and then you popped up.
Well, I would invite you to do that, and I'd be happy to...
Oh, Marco just froze.
to listen.
Super fine with anyone actually just listening. Anyone is welcome to not read and participate in whatever way that they feel most comfortable. The other thing that we proposed also was beginning with kind of a review of the narrative arc and positioning. Do we want to do that, or do we want to just get right into the reading?
Well, I think if somebody would be willing to do a review, that would be a good idea, just to, especially since Marco's joining us, I think it would be...
Oh my goodness, trippy. We have one frozen Marco. Marco's cloning on us.
I'm having some mystical experiences.
Awesome. Oh, wow. Clone Marco just supermentalized or something. Maybe the self cells raptured, and there might be a mess of globular bacteria and fungus and yeast that weren't self cells where the previous Marco was.
I'm becoming kombucha.
So I would be happy to start off kind of a review, and I'd love some help from Andrea and John Robert, if that sounds good to everyone.
I always like context.
Yeah, context is good. So let's start with the meditation, though, when Geoffrey comes back. I like starting with meditation. Do you need to check in any way, Marco? Like, other than what you already did? Like, how are you? Happy New Year. welcome back. I'm super happy that you popped up.
Well, I just have personal things going on. I'm in New York. My father passed away, as you all know, and I've been in the process of clearing out my parents' house in order to put it on the market and to move my mother to Colorado to live with us. And so there's been a ton, literally a ton, probably more than that, of things to clear, and all kinds of legal things and financial things and keeping up with work and relationships with my mother and my brother and family, all that. I've been very much on the earth plane. And of course, going through old stuff and childhood stuff brings up a lot emotionally and otherwise. And so I've been working with that as best I can. I've felt somewhat disconnected from some of the conversations that we've been having and the work that we've been doing, and in a way making peace or reintegrating different aspects of myself, this self from New York that I left behind, and having to reacquaint myself with it in a way, and what's going to carry forward. And then trying to stay connected in some way with what I think what had been growing and what had been unfolding in Cosmos and in various reading groups and my own writing projects. So it's been a lot to do, and I'm just thankful that you've kept up with the group, because it was something that was very meaningful to me, and to have it to come back to is a real blessing. Yeah, I think that's it. I can go on and on, of course, like talking about my life, but I don't think it would be so interesting to everybody else. And it's also something that everybody goes through. Not almost everybody goes through in one way or the other. It's kind of an initiation, I think, into another phase of life or stage of life, and so I'm learning what that's all about. Maybe discovering what is going to be the next phase for me.
Thanks for sharing. Yeah.
Sure.
Of course, I'm sure we're all happy to maintain this group. I think we all love reading Savitri and love this forum, this platform, and meeting this way, stack and kind of come together in this nucleus that we have here twice a month.
Yeah, I agree. And how about you all? Are there any other, while we're still waiting for Geoffrey, I'd love to hear any other updates.
No, Geoffrey's here.
I'm back. Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
It's great to have you back, Marco. You're deeply missed, but obviously we understand the situation you're in anyway. Certainly feel for you, having had been there indeed before. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Meditation. Good. So let's start with the table of contents. I think the table of contents as a guide is always a nice place to start. Book 1, the Book of Beginnings, Cantos 1 and 2, the symbol dawn and the issue. People have called these cantos preludes. There's in a narrative arc, these are either prelude cantos or there's a flashback right after Canto 2, where it goes back to Savitri's father. Canto 1 ends with, "This is the day that Satyavan must die." And so these cantos are positioned, actually, flipping ahead a little bit in the table of contents. Have a look at Book 7 and Book 8. This is something that just dawned on me this week. I had never noticed it before. Book 8, the Book of Death, is only one canto, and it's Canto 3. And there's a footnote on that they made it Canto 3. They, I think, being the archivists, made it Canto 3 to put it in as a placeholder, making the statement that it's an incomplete book. But then it did just dawn on me that it just happens to fit really nicely where Book 1, Cantos 1 and 2 fit right into that slot. I don't know if John Robert or Andrea have ever thought about that before, but clearly book 1, Cantos 1 and 2 come after the Book of Yoga is complete and right before the Death in the Forest. So there's actually like a click in right there that I thought about, and perhaps it would be nice a year from now to go back and read Cantos 1 and 2 right after we read Book 7, right before we read Book 8, to see how well those fit in right there. But then the narrative, then backing up the narrative arc from the legend of the Mahabharata, the section with Savitri and Ashwapati, there's mention of an 18-year tapasya, and it begins right here. This yoga of the king, the yoga of the soul's release, is the beginning of Savitri's father's yoga, Ashwapati. And I'm going to just read the author's note. The sentence on Ashwapati is, I'll start. Savitri is the divine word, daughter of the sun, goddess of the supreme truth, who comes down and is born to save. Ashwapati, the lord of the horse, her human father, is the lord of tapasya, concentrated energy of spiritual endeavor that helps us to rise from the mortal to the immortal planes. The concentrated energy of spiritual endeavor that helps us to rise from the mortal to the immortal planes. And the Sanskrit root Ashwa is horse, and lord of the horse is actually like lord of the sense mind, holding the reins and being able to guide the forward movement and progression. And that's what we're entering into here. The yoga of the king, the yoga of Ashwapati, the yoga of the soul's release, is him being the first to realize the psychic center, the soul in the center of the being, and begin working from there. And Sri Aurobindo has a number of letters on this. I did have a look these last couple of weeks. I had a look back at some of Sri Aurobindo's letters. There's some rich dialogue that happened between Sri Aurobindo and Katie Sethna, and it's interesting. One thing that really stands out, I wish I had it in front of me, is Sri Aurobindo saying Ashwapati's yoga is a yoga of old. It's something that happened a very long time ago. The yoga of the soul's release, the yoga of the spirit's freedom and greatness. He puts way far. Sri Aurobindo puts it way far back in time, which is interesting. And the secret knowledge is kind of what comes in between. The secret knowledge is what he realized when he came into contact with the soul, and I think it can be summarized as the realization of the divine masculine, the balance of the divine masculine and the divine feminine, the balance of Ishwara Shakti. It can be seen as the play of soul and nature, but also the themes that are running through the secret knowledge are also the realization of the circuitry between the individual, the soul, nature, the cosmic, and the transcendent. So that triad right there runs through the middle section of the Canto of Secret, the Canto of Secret Knowledge. There's those three beautiful lines that are similar, that are like the something, the immune. I turned right to it. The absolute, the perfect, the alone, and he walked in those lines that begin the absolute, the perfect, the alone. He walks us through this really beautiful summary of the force and power of the individual realization in circuitry with the absolute, the perfect, the alone, where he walks us into the vastnesses of time and the cosmic consciousness. And then he puts the absolute, the perfect, the immune as the transcendent. I'm on page 67. Sorry, I didn't say that first. So the secret knowledge is kind of what comes between the release of the soul and the yoga of the king, the yoga of the spirit's freedom and greatness, Canto V. And that brings us to the end of the beginning. And the book of the Traveler of the Worlds is the walk through not only these the different worlds, but the different gods that rule these worlds. Gods being typal, gods being correlates of the planes of consciousness, correlates of the parts of our being. And from the secret of the Veda, there's a lot of statements that he makes that are extremely similar to this author's note statement. And if Sri Aurobindo frames all of the gods and goddesses in this, from the secret of the Veda, summarized in the author's note here. But incarnations, the characters are not personified qualities. I can read that as the gods and goddesses are not personified qualities, but incarnations or emanations of living and conscious forces with whom we can enter into concrete touch, and they can take human bodies in order to help man and woman and show them the way from their mortal state to a divine consciousness and immortal life. And so book 2 begins, the book of the Traveler of the Worlds. Ashwapati still isn't mentioned by name, but the Sri Aurobindo will call him the Traveler. You'll see that in context. And when he says the Traveler, he's talking about Ashwapati. And the world stare is like a summary of the great chain of being. And then there's a gradation. Canto 2 starts with subtle matter. And then there's these life cantos. Canto 3, the fall of life, the kingdoms of the little life, the godheads of the little life. So these kingdoms are the realms or the worlds, and the godheads are the beings or emanations. And he expands out. He kind of just keeps putting layer on layer, but also bringing us through a depth with each one. Goes into Canto 5, the kingdoms and godheads of the greater life. Then between the life cantos and the mind cantos, there's this descent into night. There's the world of falsehood, the mother of evil, and the sons of darkness. These three things are completely and totally Vedic. These realms are all over the Rig Veda, and Sri Aurobindo has chapters in The Secret of the Veda with these titles. And from that, there's an emergence into the paradise of the life gods. And there's always this theme of onward he passed. He just keeps moving, not getting stuck in any of these realms. Then enters into the mind realms, where lower mind or little mind talks about the kingdoms and godheads presiding or residing over those worlds and planes, and expands out into the greater mind, and then reaches the heavens of the ideal. In the next two cantos, we'll see these beautiful worlds, the world of the deathless rose and the deathless flame, and all of this to reach the world soul, Virat. That gets a Virat, the god, is in the world soul, but he doesn't get a mention until book 11. And I love Virat's mention in book 11, something like Virat lighting campfires in the sun, just brings in, there's this solar consciousness and this toggling between earth and sun throughout this whole canto. And then the kingdom of greater knowledge. And so far, this is all an individual yoga. And through his individual tapasya, yogic discipline, he reaches the divine mother. And going back to the legend of Savitri and Ashwapati from the Mahabharata, the purpose of this yogic tapasya is to have, I think, to give birth to 100 sons, S-O-N-S. That's Ashwapati's goal from the Mahabharata. But when he comes in front of the divine mother, the boon that's at the end of book 3, the vision and the boon, is the divine mother basically saying, from the legend, saying, no, you're not going to have 100 sons. But from Savitri here, he enters into deep dialogue with the divine mother, where the divine mother is basically saying the earth isn't ready. And Ashwapati's arguing with her in some of the most beautiful divine arguments, saying that yes, the earth is ready, and the divine mother comes around and grants the boon of Savitri's birth, and then that begins part 2, the book of birth and quest. So I'm super happy to hear from John Robert and Andrea. That's probably about as much, unless anyone has more questions. I'm super happy to talk more, but I'll cap it with that.
Well, I can say that in book 1, the book of beginnings, during the beginnings of Ashwapati's yoga, there's a certain point where he realizes that this is not just for him, that he recognizes the wonder and the beauty of and the power of this state that he's realized with the discovery of the soul, the realization of the soul, and that he wants it for the whole world. So at that point, he undertakes it not just for himself. The Sri Aurobindo actually specifies that, and I think it's in I think it might be in Canto V. I've marked it, I don't remember exactly where it is. And then the other thing I want to say is that, well, a couple of other things. And this may be obvious to everyone, but it's not obvious to everyone who reads Savitri. I know, because I was just in a Savitri circle, and what hasn't been obvious. So the world stare is an inward journey. So this is Ashwapati's in trance, and So he's traveling, the essence of him is traveling through these worlds, but his body is in trance. And so it's not like he's traveling out in the universe to some other physical worlds. So again, I think that's probably obvious to a lot of people, but sometimes it's not. And then I think it's interesting that Ashwapati first finds the goddess in Canto 14 of Book 2, the World Soul. That's where he first encounters the goddess, before the Book of the Divine Mother, which comes next. So we will have our first encounters with the goddess in the story in the Book of the Traveler of the Worlds.
Does anyone know the Thoth Tarot card, the Lovers? The Lovers, there's like this marriage happening, but like behind is the Hierophant, and there's this like parting of the veil. There's something in that card that is in the World Soul. Visually, it's like there's two souls sitting, the twin souls sitting in front of the single force, and the veil gets parted, and it's like there's this vibratory frequency that the part that John Robert's talking about, that's like it's pretty powerful. We'll highlight it before we get there and talk about it as we're there. And all of these cantos can be taken out of context. If anyone wants to read ahead, there's no plot spoilers at all. I think we've already spoiled the plot for good reason.
Let me say one more thing about the Book of the Traveler of the World. So these dark cantos that Matteo mentioned, there's some of it in The Glory and the Fall of Life. That's Canto 3, which we'll come upon shortly, especially if we start the Book 2, The Traveler of the Worlds, today. And then Ashwapati he's specifically looking to understand why life, which is so glorious and beautiful in its own plane, these are all planes that are autonomous planes, these different life and mind planes. They're different from the world plane that we're in. We're in an evolutionary world plane with changes. So Ashwapati has been able to see into these life worlds, and they're so beautiful. And then he looks around him in this world, and he says, what happened? And Sri Aurobindo specifically says that Ashwapati goes in search of what happened, which is why we have those dark cantos, in order to understand, so that release and salvation can come to the world.
Is that question answered? Could you spoil that for me? Or will we learn that in time?
What's the question?
What happened in this life plane, this world plane?
Yes, we will learn.
Yeah.
He'll specify it. And Ashwapati will actually go through the same darkness that the world has gone through himself personally.
But like to answer, I'm happy to answer your question in those terms. It's the gods of life and bliss and knowledge and I'm missing one. Yeah, there was these gods were born into a pure form and and basically it's spelled out in the Kena Upanishads in a very direct way that Sri Aurobindo is alluding to over and over again. It's the eternal conquered for the gods, and in the victory of the eternal, the gods grew to greatness. But this is what they saw: ours the victory, ours the greatness. And that's the human ego. So it was the gods going through that process. All of a sudden, light, the God of life, saw ours the victory, ours the greatness, and the eternal starts messing with things. And there was a degradation where then life transformed its correlate, death. Ignorance, knowledge transformed its correlate, ignorance. Truth transformed its correlate, falsehood, and bliss transformed into its correlate. I mean, they became polar, and suffering came. So that's and then Sri Aurobindo's postulating that. Yeah, rather than just a fall into original sin, eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, etc., there's a potential for humanity to wake up and become greater by the fall. That line's a Savitri line that I'm half quoting. Basically, we'll see it somewhere in here where we became greater by the fall. And the gods go through that process in the Kena Upanishad where the eternal is challenging them, and it takes the god of mind to come closest to understanding that that's what happened. And then mind goes off into this beautiful realm with Uma, the daughter of snowy summits, basically like comes out of this realm of being challenged by the eternal and sees that it's by the victory of the eternal that the gods grew to greatness. And with that realization begins the transformation. Sorry for the plot spoiler.
Sri Aurobindo identifies specifically what Matteo is talking about in Canto IV of this book, Book 2, The Kingdoms of the Little Life. He says, the bliss changed to sorrow, knowledge made ignorant, God's force turned into a child's helplessness. And he says that can bring down heaven by their sacrifice. So he calls it a sacrifice. And he'll use this term so as if saying or saying that these powers of the divine gave up. They sacrificed their wonder and beauty and high realm to come down here. And when they did that, they changed, because that's what coming down here meant. And so then hidden inside of pain and suffering is bliss, and hidden inside of ignorance is knowledge, and so on. So those forces are here, having changed their outer shape, but they're here and they're from below, they're impelling the evolution. Again, in the evolutionary world where we are, they're impelling the movement up and back towards the realization. But Sri Aurobindo will give us, we're just talking a little bit about it, and he'll give us lots of words and metaphors and so on to express that. And I know when I read this part, the dark parts where he's saying, why did this happen, or how did this happen? I always have to read it really carefully. He says why it happens and how it happens, but I find it just easy to just kind of miss it when I'm going over it. And so we might notice that as we read it ourselves and zero in on it.
As well, it took me like 15 readings of the book, the Canto, The World of Falsehood, The Mother of Evil, and The Sons of Darkness. It took me like 15 readings, much of which I did with John Robert, to see that this Canto actually mirrors the Book of the Divine Mother. And there's this like emergence that comes out of that, that's just as powerful as I think it's the Book of Yoga, Book 7. It like mirrors it in a way, but without Satyavan present as a driving force. It's Ashwapati alone in trance, rather than Savitri alone in her inner worlds with the love bond of Satyavan and the foreknowledge of Satyavan's death that's driving her yoga in the most powerful way that I can't even imagine, being a yogi of the caliber of Savitri, knowing that the beloved is going to die in 1 year and having that be the spur to get at these processes of transformation. It's fun to be along for the ride.
So I just wanted to bring in a little bit of our discussion from because Marco and Vishnu and I are part of another little circle that's reading the Vedas. And so there are a couple of things that have really come home to me in the last little while. So I know Matteo has been saying yoga means union, but what I didn't realize and discovered the last time we were reading is that yoga also means yoking. So the idea of being yoked into these processes is what carries us forward. So it's a binding and not just a union, right? And so it has, so, and also this idea of increasing. So and impelling, I think John Robert, you just used that term. So this idea that the creator is not necessarily a creator in terms of just making things, but in terms of increasing, and through the yoking, we access the process of increasing. So I know it's not quite the same as what we're looking at here, but I think I see these currents of the Vedas shot all through this text as we read it. So I think it's interesting to look at those comparisons.
It's super analogous, Geoffrey, and I'm glad that you're also seeing it. It's why people call it the fifth, why people call Savitri the fifth Veda. It's Vedic through and through. It's Upanishadic also. It's all, he's saying it and he's doing it all in non-Vedic terms also. He's actually using terms that these gods and goddesses are correlates of, like there's so many examples, but Saraswati being inspiration, intuitive inspiration. There's all, we could make a key and a legend for it, but it's all there.
Anyway, your explanation of the context was extremely useful to me in terms of understanding where we are, even though I've read it, but there's so much more going on here than you could just pick up from the individual reading. And the text is very dense. I mean, it's very beautiful, but it's very dense. It's not always easy to get the larger vision when you're in it. So it's really useful for me to get these broader context.
Let's do it often. Let's do it. Let's keep stepping back and revisiting the context. I'm super happy with that.
We have a small Savitri circle here in the town where I live. And we've been reading, in May, it'll be 2 years that we've been reading every two times a month, like we do. And we do context every single time. Every single time.
Shall we read? Marco, would you like to read, Marco?
I think I'd better not, just because I'm expecting to be interrupted.
Okay. How about just with the order on my screen? How about we go Andrea, Geoffrey, Matteo, John Robert. Andrea, Geoffrey, Matteo, John Robert. Beginning with Book 2, the Book of the Traveler of the Worlds, Canto 1.
That's great.
Book 2, the Book of the Traveler of the Worlds. Canto 1, the World's Stair. Alone he moved, watched by the infinity around him and the unknowable above. All could be seen that shuns the mortal eye. All could be known the mind has never grasped. All could be done no mortal will can dare. A limitless movement filled a limitless peace. In a profound existence beyond Earth's parent or kin to our ideas and dreams, where space is a vast experiment of the soul, in an immaterial substance linked to ours, in a deep oneness of all things that are, the universe of the unknown arose. A self-creation without end or pause revealed the grandeurs of the infinite. It flung into the hazards of its play a million moods, a myriad energies, the world shapes that are fancies of its truth, and the formulas of the freedom of its force. It poured into the ever-stable's flux a Bacchic rapture and revel of ideas, a passion and motion of everlastingness. There rose unborn into the unchanging's surge, thoughts that abide in their deathless consequence, words that immortal last through though fallen mute, acts that brought out from silence its dumb sense, lines that convey the inexpressible. The eternal stillness saw in unmoved joy his universal power at work display in plots of pain and dramas of delight the wonder and beauty of her will to be. All, even pain, was the soul's pleasure here. Here all experience was a single plan, the thousand-fold expression of the One.
All came at once into his single view. Nothing escaped his vast, intuitive sight. Nothing drew near he could not feel as kin. He was one spirit with that immensity. Images in a supernal consciousness embodying the unborn who never dies. The structured visions of the cosmic self alive with the touch of being's eternity looked at him like form-bound spiritual thoughts, figuring the movements of the ineffable. Aspects of being donned world outline, forms that open moving doors on things divine, become familiar to his hourly sight. The symbols of the spirit's reality, the living bodies of the bodiless grew near to him, his daily associates. The exhaustless seeings of the unsleeping mind, letterings of its contact with the invisible, surrounded him with countless pointing signs. The voices of 1,000 realms of life missioned to him her mighty messages. The heaven hints that invade our earthly lives, the dire imaginations dreamed by hell, which if enacted and experienced here, our dulled capacity soon would cease to feel, or our mortal frailty could not long endure, were set in their sublime proportions there. There lived out in their self-born atmosphere, they resumed their topless pitch and native power. Their fortifying stress upon the soul bit deep into the ground of consciousness, and passion and purity of their extremes, the absoluteness of their single cry, and the sovereign sweetness or violent poetry of their beautiful or terrible delight.
All thought can know, or widest sight perceive, and all that thought and sight can never know. All things occult and rare, remote and strange, were near to heart's contact, felt by spirit sense. Asking for entry at his nature's gates, they crowned the widened spaces of his mind, his self-discoveries flaming witnesses, offering their marvel and their multitude. These now became new portions of himself, the figures of his spirit's greater life, the moving scenery of his large time walk, or the embroidered tissue of his sense. These took the place of intimate human things and moved as close companions of his thoughts, or were his soul's natural environment. Tireless, the heart's adventure of delight, endless, the kingdoms of the spirit's bliss, unnumbered tones struck from one harmony's strings, each to its wide-winged universal poise, its fathomless feeling of the all-in-one, brought notes of some perfection yet unseen, its single retreat into truth's secrecies, its happy sidelight on the infinite. All there the unique had dreamed and made, tinging with ceaseless rapture and surprise, and an opulent beauty of passionate difference, the recurring beat that moments God in time. Only was missing the soul timeless word that carries eternity in its lonely sound, the idea, self-luminous key to all ideas, the integer of the Spirit's perfect sum that equates the unequal all to the equal one, the single sign interpreting every sign, the absolute index to the absolute.
There, walled apart by its own innerness, in a mystical barrage of dynamic light, he saw a lone, immense, high-curved world pile, erect, like a mountain chariot of the gods, motion under an inscrutable sky. As if from matter's plinth and viewless base to a top as viewless, a carved sea of worlds, climbing with foam-maned waves to the supreme, ascended towards breadths immeasurable. It hoped to soar into the ineffable's reign. 100 levels raised it to the unknown. So it towered up to heights intangible and disappeared in the hushed, conscious vast, as climbs a story-eyed temple tower to heaven, built by the aspiring soul of man to live near to his dream of the invisible. Infinity calls to it as it dreams and climbs. Its spire touches the apex of the world, mounting into great voiceless stillnesses. It marries the earth to screened eternities. Amid the many systems of the one, made by an interpreting creative joy, alone it points us to our journey back out of our long self-loss in nature's deeps. Planted on earth, it holds in it all realms. It is a brief compendium of the vast. This was the single stair to being's goal. A summary of the stages of the spirit, its copy of the cosmic hierarchies, refashioned in our secret air of self, a subtle pattern of the universe. It is within, below, without, above. Acting upon this visible nature's scheme, it wakens our earth matter's heavy doze to think and feel and to react to joy. It models in us our diviner parts, lifts mortal mind into a greater air, makes yearn this life of flesh to intangible aims, links the body's death with immortality's call. Out of the swoon of the unconscious, it labors toward a superconscient light. Earth were all, and this what in her thought could not be, nor life delight's response. Only material forms could then be her guests, driven by an inanimate world force.
Earth, by this golden superfluity, bore thinking man, and more than man shall bear. This higher scheme of being is our cause, and holds the key to our ascending fate. It calls out of our dense mortality the conscious spirit nursed in matter's house. The living symbol of these conscious planes, its influences and godheads of the unseen, its unthought logic of reality's acts, arisen from the unspoken truth in things, have fixed our inner life's slow scaled degrees. Its steps are paces of the soul's return from the deep adventure of material birth, a ladder of delivering ascent, and rungs that nature climbs to deity. Once, in the vigil of a deathless gaze, these grades had marked her giant downward plunge, the wide and prone leap of a Godhead's fall. Our life is a holocaust of the Supreme. The great World Mother, by her sacrifice, has made her soul the body of our state. Accepting sorrow and unconsciousness, divinity's lapse from its own splendors, wove the many-patterned ground of all we are. An idol of self is our mortality. Our earth is a fragment and a residue. Her power is packed with the stuff of greater worlds and steeped in their color lustres dimmed by her drowse. An atavism of higher births is hers. Her sleep is stirred by their buried memories, recalling the lost spheres from which they fell.
unsatisfied forces in her bosom move. They are partners of her greater growing fate and her return to immortality. They consent to share her doom of birth and death. They kindle partial gleams of the all and drive her blind, laborious spirit to compose a meager image of the mighty whole. The calm and luminous intimacy within approves her work and guides the unseeing power. His vast design accepts a puny start. An attempt, a drawing half done is the world's life. Its lines doubt their concealed significance. Its curves join not their high intended close. Yet some first image of greatness trembles there. And when the ambiguous crowded parts have met the many-toned unity to which they moved, the artist's joy shall laugh at reason's rules. The divine intention suddenly shall be seen. The end vindicate intuition's sure technique. A graph shall be of many meeting worlds, a cube and union crystal of the gods. A mind shall think behind nature's mindless mask. A conscious vast fill the old, dumb, brute space. This faint and fluid sketch of soul called man shall stand out on the background of long time, a glowing epitome of eternity, a little point reveal the infinitudes. A mystery's process is the universe. At first was laid a strange anomalous base, a void, a cipher of some secret whole, where zero held infinity in its sum, and all and nothing were a single term, an eternal negative, a matrix naught. Into its forms the child is ever born, who lives forever in the vasts of God.
A slow reversal's movement then took place. A slow reversal's movement then took place. A gas belched out from some invisible fire. Of its dense rings were formed these million stars. Upon earth's newborn soil, God's tread was heard. Across the thick smoke of earth's ignorance, a mind began to see and look at forms, and groped for knowledge in the nescient night. Caught in a blind stone grip, force worked its plan, and made in sleep this huge mechanical world, that matter might grow conscious of its soul, and, like a busy midwife, the life power deliver the zero carrier of the all. Because eternal eyes turned on earth's gulfs, the lucent clarity of a pure regard, and saw a shadow of the unknowable mirrored in the inconscient's boundless sleep. Creation's search for self, creation's search for self began its stir. A spirit dreamed in the crude cosmic whirl. Mind flowed, unknowing in the sap of life, and matter's breasts suckled the divine idea. A miracle of the absolute was born. Infinity put on a finite soul. All ocean lived within a wandering drop. A time-made body housed the illimitable. To live this mystery out, our souls came here.
A seer within, who knows the ordered plan concealed behind our momentary steps, inspires our ascent to viewless heights, as once the abysmal leap to earth and life. His call had reached the traveler in time. Apart in an unfathomed loneliness, he traveled in his mute and single strength, bearing the burden of the world's desire. A formless stillness called, a nameless light. Above him was the white, immobile ray. Around him, the eternal silences. No turns to the high-pitched attempt. World after world disclosed its guarded powers, heaven after heaven, its deep beatitudes. But still the invisible magnet drew his soul. A figure sole on nature's giant stair, he mounted towards an indiscernible end on the bare summit of created things. End of Canto 1.
Any comments or questions or any?
I just want to make a reference to the first line on page 102, bearing the burden of the world's desire. So he traveled in his mute and single strength, bearing the burden of the world's desire. So that's Ashwapati. And if you refer back to the first line in Canto 3 of Book 1, the Yoga of the King, this is when we first meet Ashwapati. The first line is, a world's desire compelled her mortal birth. And so that's in a kind of a cosmic sense why Savitri came. And here in the book of the worlds, in the canto, the World Stair, Sri Aurobindo explicitly says that Ashwapati is bearing the whole world's desire. Yeah, bearing the burden of the world's desire in his travel. So to say this is not just an individual yoga, this is a world yoga that he's undertaken.
And what struck me on page 99, if earth were all, and this were not in her, thought could not be, nor life delight's response. But there all of a sudden is that notion that the earth is her, that this is not in her. If this were not in her, this whole thing wouldn't be happening.
I have a question about the repeating nature of these movements. There's a ascent that and experiences of a transcendent nature, and this happens in the previous canto, and then some kind of meeting, a descent of the eternal or of a feminine goddess type of energy. And then there's a journey undertaken to perhaps integrate them, or to to proceed on this journey or the path. I find myself getting a little bit confused, and maybe it's because I've been disconnected for a little while, about kind of what the differences are between one ascent and the next. In book one, there was a kind of opening to knowledge and a transcendence, you know, of individual material existence, and then there was a kind of fall from that, and then a desire to return. So how would you characterize the cyclical nature of what is happening here, if it is indeed cyclical? Yeah, I think that's my question here, because I'm noticing it in this canto again, that there's transcendent kinds of experiences which then get met with you know, which get kind of enacted. Does that make sense?
Well, Marco, I'm going to take a shot at least one answer. So when we go forward into these cantos on life, Sri Aurobindo was going to describe in detail how difficult it was for the life plane to come into the evolutionary plane. It was like coming into a grave, or like being encased in stone. And we saw that difficulty in the very first canto, when you have this night, this kind of this omniscient being with just this vague memory and trying to remember herself and where she came from. And so it seems like the rhythm of the spiritual life is what you're describing. There's an ascent and then there's a fallback. There's another ascent and there's a fallback. It's not a steady road. And it falls back because when you ascend, light comes into the part of the being that's receptive. And then there may be a transformation or a partial transformation. But then the other parts of the being reassert themselves. And so you fall back. And then, and Sri Aurobindo also says specifically, and probably in more than one place in Savitri, that the divine works even during the descent or after the descent in a hidden way. So it seems to be the rhythm, like the rhythm of breath, the incoming and the outgoing, incoming and the outgoing. Seems to be kind of a fundamental principle of spiritual life. And that principle builds us gradually, because we're Sri Aurobindo called humanity the unfinished species, unfinished humans. We're unfinished. And the building so far has taken, 11 billion years in this universe. 4 billion years on this planet. Time seems to be a necessary part of the way this manifestation works.
I appreciate that, John Robert. Thank you. I want to touch back on the larger context, because I understand there's also a story being told here, and something of a more structural transformation that is being promised, in addition to or building on the ascent and the cyclical nature of opening and closing, or ascending and descending. So I'm sometimes struggling to discern where are the structural transformations, and how are those different than the experiential types of changes that occur.
Yeah, I think that's a great question.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's what's the term? A priori, I think, is the term. It's difficult. I think having looking at Sri Aurobindo for just a couple of decades now, I think I can state pretty assuredly that the structural came out of the experiential. I mean, certainly he had a priori stuff going on before the experiences started happening. But once the experiences started happening, is when he started putting the mental structures into discernible form. It's a hard question, Marco. I guess we're all at a different starting point, and for me, that's the personal yogic aspiration. Also, is if there's any a priori structural understanding, I'm looking for the experiences to back that up, or to shift that, right? Because that's the very nature of mental consciousness, is that it wants to say I understand, but it really does need the experience to have it be to have a spiritual realization, become concrete, become solid. It can't happen without experience. It's a beautiful play. A hard question to answer. Thank you.
I think it'll be an ongoing inquiry here, certainly for myself. So I don't expect an answer necessarily. It's something that I've been noting as we've gone through the cantos, is this pattern of ascent and descent, and wanting to see where the structures, the underlying structures change, such that a more if not ascended, then integrated state would be maintained. That would be a goal of mine anyway.
So, Marco, I want to say one more thing about this. So this comes at your question a little bit differently. These are 2 lines from a sonnet that Sri Aurobindo wrote. If perfect moments on the peaks of things, these tops of knowledge, greatness, were only moments, this too enough could be. So there's the aspiration, and there's also the equanimity. There's both of them involved. I think that's amazing. Those lines are amazing. This too enough could be.
I was going to say this raises for me another issue. And I don't want to open it up too much this way, but this relationship between experience and structure is the way you refer to it, Marco, I think, anyway. or maybe I'm recapitulating John Robert, but so Savitri is a spiritual journey, and we each have our own spiritual journeys that somehow resonate, right? There are resonances between what we're reading in Savitri and then spiritual aspects of our own journey that are going on individually, each of us. And I don't know very much about, I maybe know a little bit about Marco because we've shared quite a lot on Infinite Conversations, but I don't know very much about the others here of your own spiritual journeys. And so I don't think we're here to talk about our individual spiritual journeys, but we're here to read and understand Savitri. But you can't really understand it, I don't think, or at least it's helped to understand it if you can understand something about the experience of other people in relating Savitri to their own journeys. And so I would encourage, I don't know, I'm not sure what I'm saying. I think I'm encouraging a little bit more sharing about those connections, because that would help me in understanding and applying Savitri to my own life. Does that make sense, what I'm saying?
Yeah, sure, it does.
And this circle can be whatever we want it to be. And I love the suggestion, Geoffrey. I second whatever you just said. I second it.
I mean, maybe it'll just happen naturally anyway. It's just maybe being attentive to it, I guess, is what I'm suggesting.
Well, just in the spirit of that, I would say that part of what I'm experiencing through this reading is there's a part of me that thinks or knows or wants to say that, oh, I know all this already. Like, this is of course, this makes total sense. And then there's another part that feels that it's way beyond me at the same time. And that's where maybe the structural and the state experience kinds of aspects come together, because it seems that some part of my experience knows this, but then at the same time, some part of my actual lived structural life is not there at all. And so reconciling, bringing those together is one of the, I guess, questions that has arisen just in the course of this reading in the last little while. I think that's where my question is coming from, is that kind of schizophrenia between experiential type knowing, but then daily reality that doesn't necessarily reflect that knowing in a grounded or an integrated or a consistent way.
That makes me feel how, for me, reading Savitri over decades and returning to it again and again, because I really get it that this is a transmission. It is not just a transmission of mind, it's a transmission into the body. So the whole point is that the material world, of which we are at this place where we can become conscious that we are the manifestation of that, to continue to bring that in, because that gets, I forget that all the time, you know. It's like, so for me it is each time dipping into Savitri, and especially since we are reading out loud, and I know for me, when I myself read out loud, my body receives it in a way that it doesn't receive it in any other way, because the sound is actually coming through my own cellular structure. And that, of course, we're just scratching the beginnings of becoming conscious human beings, right? Becoming really conscious of what we are. rather than these little separate entities that suffer and that have all these ideas, and we are right and you're wrong, all that stuff, to transcend myself, my being as my, not just my mind, but even in my being itself, in my physical being, to receive that transmission. That's what I do with it, and it continues, you know, there's, because it's, I just feel, you know, we're all still in kindergarten. No matter how wonderful our minds are developed or we think.
Just to go back to the idea of this too enough could be, or to elaborate on it a little bit, there's the idea of unknowing, or the opportunity to become comfortable with not knowing. And there's another line from one of Savitri, one of Sri Aurobindo's sonnets, assenting to thy all-wise, inscrutable will. Assenting to thy all-wise, inscrutable will. I love that, the conjunction of all-wise and inscrutable. There's a kind of the knowing part that knows that this is, somehow knows that this is all wise. And then there's the other part, it's a mystery. It's mystery. And the mystery is the truth. They're both the truth. So Sri Aurobindo is always, in Savitri, he's always presenting the mind with seeming opposites. I don't think you could find a page in Savitri where he's not putting things together like that. Things that, you know, if your mind really tries to get it, just goes, because it can't handle it. It's that, until it reaches the place that Andrea was talking about, you know, some higher place. And then even when the mind reaches that, we have our other parts that haven't gotten anywhere close to that yet. And they still have a really big influence on our lives.
I would like to read this line again at the top of 101. So he talks about an eternal negative, a matrix not. Into its forms the child is ever born, who lives forever in the vasts of God. So that is happening, that is each one of us. There is that, I love the child within us, the divine child, who is part of the vastness, is born in us, not only in all the human beings, but in ourselves is ever born. Into my form, this child is ever born. Like this is an ongoing process. That's why it keeps going and going and going. It goes around and around.
So to build a little bit more on this, we'll find in later in Ashwapati's yoga and then in Savitri's yoga, as Sri Aurobindo describes them, find them going beyond the mind, going beyond the mental understanding, giving up the mental understanding, realizing how far the mental understanding can take, and it's not far enough. I mean, it's very graphic the way Sri Aurobindo will describe that, and for both yogas in this book.
Reminds me of a statement that he made in The Life Divine, that the highest state of consciousness that the mind is capable of is silence. That's really hard for my monkey mind to grasp, but but I know it's possible. There's lots of talk right now of knowing and not knowing, and it reminds me of these 4 lines in a favorite canto of ours, book 7, the Book of Yoga, Canto 6, Nirvana and the Discovery of the All-Negating Absolute, where it's also not knowing. It's not just knowing and not knowing, it's being and not being. And the 4 lines are, if all existence, this is on 548, halfway down. If all existence could renounce to be, and being take refuge in non-being's arms, and non-being could strike out its ciphered round, some luster of that reality might appear. There's all these cyclical paradoxes.
Oh, that reminds me a little, Matteo, of the beginning of Canto V in the last book. The line that stuck out for me is on the first page, where, speaking of Ashwapati, he dared to live when breath and thought were still. Thus could he step into that magic place which few can even glimpse with hurried glance. Lifted for a moment from mind's labored works and the poverty of nature's earthly sight. And that struck me because when breath is still, then there's not life, there's death, or at least that's what I would think. We're always breathing, and most of the time thinking. But there's this suggestion here that that one can be in that place of non-being, and I don't even know where the body is then at that point. There isn't breathing, then apparently the body would be dead. And so I didn't understand that, frankly. Actually, I did though want to take a step back and return to Andrea's point earlier, because that kind of answered something for me. It answered my question in a way. This idea of the transmission and of getting it into one's body. And the role that reciting, speaking, performing the words has in that process. That is part of why I'm here, I think, is because the experience of reading the words together brings something into the body, and takes it from the realm of ideas where I think I know, believe I may know, to something I can feel, something that can be a lived experience. So those are 2 different things, but they're both present for me right now, so I'm sharing them.
Thank you, Marco. What just comes to me is to add to that, not only do I then let it come through my body, but you are all here. And so the container is much bigger than just me. There is actually, through me and through my intention, I am part of the transmission, because there are others, and we do that for one another. And being in together creates a anyway. I can find all kinds of words for that. You know what I mean. It creates a greater and more meaningful container and resonance because we resonate with one another, and it makes it more significant inside of my own being. That's how I experience that. Reading it out loud by myself is not nearly, it's not even half of my experience as when I read it and we are together.
I was going to comment, and when Matteo, you talked about silence, I was going to comment because there are these pregnant silences between what we say to each other at this point in time. And I was attentive to the fact that these silences aren't the normal silences. They're not the ones where you're thinking your mind is going at 10 million miles an hour to come up with an answer. It's really the kinds of silences where you're just simply trying to absorb what you're getting in a way and let it sit rather than come up with ideas, you know, which is what I think you're talking about with the body. So one of the things that I was stuck with when I stalled when I think it was me who was reading, I stalled when I read it, and then I keep coming back to it. So it's on page 96. Alive with the touch of being's eternity, looked at him like, aspects of being dawned, world outline. So that structure of phrase is slightly difficult to get as you read it. It's not easy to figure out. Aspects of being dawned, world outline. I think that's part of what we're talking about. I sense
I noticed when you read that.
Yeah.
Is aspects of being dawned world outline. Did you get that?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, but I'm just saying the world outline is an odd word.
Yeah.
And so it's partly, I think, what we're talking about when we're talking about the body and the sort of edge of experience, and it's partly the world and it's partly the world outline. It's kind of this mix going on there. And then a little bit further down the page, he talks about the exhaustless seeings of the unsleeping mind, which suggests to me that Sri Aurobindo knew something about not being able to sleep at night, which is my health problem, apnea, that I'm dealing with right now. And so it sort of drove home to me the sort of specifics of my current body state when I'm reading this. And then I thought, yeah, but this is irrelevant to the story because, you know, it's my body state, it's not everybody else's. And then the more we talk about it, the more I think, well, it's not irrelevant. It's where the one breaks through into the other somehow. I don't know. And it has to do with these silences, I think. I'm not being very clear. I'm usually more clear in what I talk about, but I think.
You're super clear to me, Geoffrey.
I'd like to say one more thing about that. The exhaustless seeings of the unsleeping mind. You notice that Sri Aurobindo capitalizes the word mind. And it reminded me of, I went to a workshop this weekend with Debashish Banerjee on the Upanishads. And the notion came up of participation, that our senses are participatory. So I'm going to phrase it in a certain way and see if it resonates with you guys. So when we open our eyes, we participate in something that's going on all the time. We join the seeing. We think it's you know, oh, I'm seeing now. With my eyes closed, I can't see the external world. And with my eyes open, oh, I see it. Because the ego always wants to take possession of everything. But it can also be experienced as a joining of the seeing and the mind, the unsleeping mind, our mind, as a joining of that cosmic mind, which is unsleeping and which is there, present, minding all the time. And of course, the silence is there all the time too.
Mind is mind's a great word in that it really can jump from it can't ever really be an object, so it very naturally becomes a verb, minding, but very, very rarely is the verb minding. It's usually got a very narrow definition of like, yeah, minding this and minding that. Don't mind me. It's got this like it's got a funny play as a verb, but in a broader sense as a verb, it's got there's a real delight around it. I don't know. I'm not being super clear, but I just I like the play on parts of speech that you had going on in those statements, John Robert. Happy to end with a meditation with you all if we're about there. Any other further anythings? Or any further nothings?
Just want to say how lovely it is to share these silences with one another. Really very special. Thank you.
Thank you. My suggestion, Matteo, is that we reread that last little section, the one after the break leading up to the end. It's a half a page, and then we do the meditation. Would that be all right?
Lovely. Would you like to read that last section, Geoffrey?
Sure. Oh dear.
Give me 1 minute. Or less. Let me just get to it. Okay.
Yeah, I also have to I lost it.
101.
Right. Okay. A seer within who knows the ordered plan concealed behind our momentary steps inspires our ascent to viewless heights as once the abysmal leap to earth and life. His call had reached the traveler in time. Apart in an unfathomed loneliness, he traveled in his mute and single strength, bearing the burden of the world's desire. A formless stillness called, a nameless light. Above him was the white immobile ray, around him the eternal silences. No term was fixed to the high-pitched attempt. World after world disclosed its guarded powers. Heaven after heaven its deep beatitudes. But still the invisible magnet drew his soul. A figure soul on nature's giant stair, he mounted towards the indiscernible end on the bare summit of created things.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Leaving with you.
Thank you, everyone. See you next time. I hope you can join us again, Marco.
I hope so too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.